Did Trump really end chemtrails? This is a rumor that's been going around for a little while. When I started to dig into this a little bit, it got traced back to a few YouTube accounts and a couple of articles that I thought were very important to discuss, as well as I think it's very important to discuss some of the culture of what's going on here, because I think it's very important that we start thinking very critically, not only about the mainstream, but some of the voices in alternative media, because for a very long time, we've always, kind of brought attention to the fact that even in a lot of alternative media, there's a lot of narratives going on, there's a lot of blind spots that are happening, and it's really important to practice maintaining this neutral inner state of being that allows you to keep a bigger picture perspective of what's going on. A lot of people in the space are not doing that and are starting to become very blind to what's taking place in our world. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit here. And I'm going to start it off with, when I first heard this story, I was on Instagram and someone was talking about chemtrails, and somebody came on there and was like, like so matter-of-factly, like, Trump already stopped chemtrails. And I was like, what? Where does this come from? And then so I started looking at it. He signed an executive order to stop it. The more I looked into it, the more I realized, okay, this is really coming from very flaky sources all over the place. So I kept digging and digging and digging. The more I dug, I traced it back to another, like a previous article I did, or a story I did about 5G. I traced it back to the same person, which was Serial Brain 2. And Serial Brain 2 from the 5G situation said that, Trump's pushing forward with 5G because, he's producing a good form of 5G that isn't going to hurt anybody. Of course, there's absolutely no evidence to state that either 5G isn't going to hurt anybody if it comes from Trump, nor is there any evidence to state that Trump is pushing a good version of 5G. It was literally just one of those stories that comes out of the conspiracy world sometimes that I think, very heavily discredit the movement and make it so that people are more confused than actually being in a better state of understanding what's going on. And, we had talked about that, and you saw a lot of different channels, including Edge of Wonder, sort of regurgitate that information from Serial Brain 2, stating like, hey, and then a lot of people started to get on board with that. And this is one of the issues that I think goes on a lot, is that a lot of the reporters out there that are talking about the stuff that goes on in this space are often, and this is very fair because there's not a lot of resources in alternative media and talking about finances to actually produce solid investigation, but a lot of people are just regurgitating what everyone else says. Not something that we do here at Collective Evolution nor on CETV. We research, we look around, we understand what's going on, and we create a big picture perspective on what's happening. Regurgitation stuff, it's not our thing. But you're seeing some of the issues with some of this regurgitation stuff already. Going back to Trump and the chemtrails here, Serial Brain 2 again puts out another story. We're going to get to that in more detail in a second. But as I'm digging through it, I'm finding, this world truth.tv, Trump promises to end chemtrails. If you actually read the article and go through it, there's no sources, there's no evidence. It's talking about tweets that were taken down instantaneously after, the tweets said that, my first executive orders were going to end chemtrails. There's just no evidence at all to any of this stuff. But, there's no date stamp on this article, so I have no idea when it was even put out. But this could have been one of the starting points of people thinking that Trump's ending chemtrails. Then I came across an article in The Express that's talking about truth about Donald Trump's tour of a chemtrail plane and plan to stop secretive sprays. So this is all centered around a picture that went viral, which you're going to see here, of Trump being on what is an alleged chemtrail plane. Now, I've looked into these types of pictures because we've been reporting on chemtrails here at Collective Evolution for a very long time. And one of the things is there's always been pictures that go around about supposed chemtrail planes and what they look like from the inside. We've looked into these, we've tried to check the credibility of these, we've done a lot on this. And we've written articles about looking at these photographs as back as I think 2015 or even 2016. And we talk about how, well, first of all, a lot of test flights, when they're testing planes, they use water ballasts filled with water to be able to test and mimic different weights for the plane. So for example, if you're testing a test flight with 50 passengers, you know how much water to put in these water ballasts. If you are testing a flight with a full capacity, it's this many. If you want to go beyond full capacity, let's say there's an X amount of luggage or whatever, they use water ballasts set up across the plane, much like you see in a lot of these pictures, to run those tests. The point here being, just because you see a picture with some tubes and some different things doesn't mean it's a chemtrail plane, especially when there's very public and obvious explanations for what's going on. Now, there are some pictures of some of these planes, which we've also written articles about, that don't seem to be quite the same type of plane picture. However, the one that you see Trump on here very much resembles a test airplane. So there's nothing to say that this image itself has anything to do with a tour of a chemtrail plane, even though that's the story that's been going on for a while. So once you start really pulling this stuff together a little bit more and you understand what's going on, it gets into what we've always warned against and what we've always talked about here at Collective Evolution, which is the idea that there's conspiracy theories, then there's credibility within those, and then in order to get the general public to truly understand what's going on within this, it's about providing what the actual evidence states and staying away from the more fringy, no evidence sort of conspiracy theories that are oftentimes just people trying to affirm what they already understand, but it's not going to fly in the mainstream world or in people who are even on the fence. Like, there's a lot of people who are open, but when they see stories like that, it's like, yeah, but I debunked it in half a second over here. This is about getting to the bottom of what's actually going on with a lot of this stuff, and we need to start being a little bit more critical in our thinking. And as people who are creating, if there's anybody listening, perhaps Zero Brain 2 or anybody else that actively creates content in this space, do a better job of creating more evidence-based content in order to create a culture within this space that is a lot more open and is less built around narratives and getting stuck. Because as we're going to talk about in a couple of seconds, it's one of the big things that's happening a lot in the conspiracy space right now is people are absolutely stuck to certain narratives, and it's making it so that they don't understand or see clearly what's going on. And we're going to talk about some of those details in a second. But when I came upon this Zero Brain 2 article, it was on Reddit. As Trump confirms he took control of chemtrails and reveals more. This was written about a month ago, and I went through and I read this whole article. And if you don't know a lot about Zero Brain 2, it's a channel, and I guess it's a guy who's looking at various events that are happening. He's a very big Q follower and advocate of Q, and he's looking at events, and he's using various forms of decoding. Some of it's numerology driven, some of it's sort of utilizing numbers and letters together and decoding various things that are happening in tweets that Trump puts out, that Q puts out, looking at various words that are stated with certain objects that people might be holding in the public eye, and utilizing all of that to create a narrative of what's actually going on. A lot of it is based around content that this person is creating, and then is stating that Trump is confirming the content that Zero Brain 2 is creating via his speeches and so forth and tweets and stuff like that. Now, this isn't that, like, I'm not picking on the fact that he believes that's going on. If there was good evidence that that's what's going on, I would say, hey, you know what, maybe there's something to this. The challenge is when I start looking through a lot of this stuff that Zero Brain 2 has been stating for a long time, and I've been looking at this over the course of many months, most of the time I come to the conclusion that either this is very bad evidence or there's really nothing here. There are some times where I say, hey, that's kind of interesting. There could be more to that, but it deserves a lot more investigation to really figure out what's going on. Whereas claims are being made here that are, some of which are just like not even close to reality. Like they're so far out. And again, I'm not saying reality in the sense of like, oh, you're not allowed to discuss fringe topics. Fringe topics are not okay to discuss. I'm saying the means by which they're going about trying to prove this is so far off that it's like when people say, and I'm not suggesting this, but when people say, man, like conspiracy theorists are kind of mentally ill, I think it's this kind of stuff that fuels that, because you're making connections. In this particular case, there's connections being made where it's like Trump is holding this color of paper. This color of paper sort of matches the color of pizza dough. And then when he says, this guy's name, Pizzella, I think his name is, which is really just like a form of Italian cookie. He's basically saying that he's going after Pizzagate now. And it's like, this is not even close. Like this is kind of wild stuff. And his claim for how Trump, in this article, how Trump has ended chemtrails, and how if you continue to see chemtrails in the sky after this article, it's just Trump and their administration doing cleaning now of the sky. So it's going to look exactly the same, it's going to be the same, but they're now cleaning the sky. Leaving out of the entire equation that if you stopped spraying chemtrails, the atmosphere would already clean itself. It's how it's designed. That's how people talk about chemtrails to begin with. They go up into the air, rain comes down, grabs onto the particles, brings those particles to the ground. They go in the soil, they go on people. It already happens. It already cleans itself. You don't need to then clean the atmosphere. You know, a little bit of research on this would look at these theories and kind of say, well, this is kind of ridiculous, right? The challenge is I look at the comments. I look at the amount of people who come onto our content, our comments on Instagram, YouTube, our articles, email messages we get, people that actively watch channels like this and come on saying like, you know, why are you guys even writing about chemtrails? Like Trump already ended that. Or, you know, why are you guys writing about this? Zero Brain 2 has already said this. And it's like every time I look into the evidence, I say, you know, this is where there's a challenge because there's a culture being created by YouTube channels like this. And there are a few other very prominent YouTube channels and YouTubers that speak at conferences, that are very active on, you know, line and all sorts, who say very similar stuff that has little to no evidence. And I'm not going to name names because I'm not here to pick on anybody. That's not my goal. My goal is to help create a different culture within this space. And when I say that, I'm ultimately saying, I believe we need to move to a point where we are a lot more grounded in facts. There is enough facts out there to truly create incredible content that can open up people's eyes. The challenge is we're choosing really just way out there stuff that has no evidence, that is clearly not looking at the truth of what's taking place when you take a step back. And that stuff is fuel for everybody to be banned on YouTube, to be banned on Google, to be banned on Facebook, because anything that sounds a little bit out there and conspiracy-ish now gets lumped into the category of this stuff, right? And then people won't believe real evidence about chemtrails because there's people like this out there saying things that are just not even close to the truth. Now, why do I bring it up that way? Here's why I bring it up that way. There's a man by the name of Mick West. You might know his website, Metabunk. I think he also has one, if I believe, contrailscience.com. And this guy has been debunking, if you will, conspiracy theories for a while. Some of his favorites are Flat Earth, which very easy to debunk. There's really nothing there with Flat Earth. And with chemtrails, he's been debunking it like crazy. The challenge is that with chemtrails, he's actually selectively deciding to ignore a number of different factors, making it so that he picks solely on the type of accounts that are saying things like Zero Brain 2 is saying, and instead of actually looking at the real evidence that exists. And now I'm going to give you an example. He was on Joe Rogan, and